Welcome to the only podcast about made-up dragons stealing made-up ideas from made-up fantasy role players. My name's Andrew Hornbeck.
And I'm Foster Grant. Today we are delving into the depths of the Dragon's Lair, looking for lost treasures submitted by you, the listeners.
Shh! Foster, he's right there. Today, we pick up an NPC and head into the Badlands, where we answer some Reddit questions, but also have our first monster spotlight.
We also go to visit my stepson, Enrique, and search for more questions submitted by you, the listeners. So grab your knitting needles. This is the Dragon's Hoard.
Alright, Foster, do you remember what happened the last time on the Dragon's Hoard cast?
Well, aside from being drugged and put through a wild amount of illusions, no, I do not.
Oh. Well, that's exactly what I was gonna say, is maybe not the drug part, because that's still up in the air. You know, it could have been magic, and maybe not drugs, but when very last we left off, Butternut was revealed as a horse. I know, shocking, of course, but as we all know, this town has not taken a liking to horses. Butternut will probably be slaughtered unless you act very quickly.
Because of such non-likingness to horses, we are going to just book it, man. No sense in risking my trusty steed.
There's a half-orc that blocks the doorway. He says, No horses here, you know the rules.
Well, I draw my trusty sword and try and cut a hole through the back wall so we can escape.
Yeah, you turn on your heels to maybe try and cut through the back wall.
I'm gonna at least try and do like a perforate edge so Butternut can just slam right through.
Yeah, you do that right beside the orc, and Butternut kind of rears up on one of their hooves and uses the other free hoof to kick through the wall. You have a pretty narrow opening to get out, and Butternut just nimbly hops through, and I'm assuming you do as well.
Yes, I fall right on Butternut's hoof.
You jump behind, but you feel something grab onto your ankle. It's that half-orc. He's not happy that you just perforated, if we're going to be fair, you perforated a hole into what you now know is his bar, because he says it's his bar. And he slams you on the ground. You can see he's got a pair of brass knuckles, and he's about to do something that you probably won't like to your face.
Well, I grab my sword and roll over to my back and do one of those cool things where you just like pop up on your feet, and I throw the sword at him and run.
Yeah, you're at point blank, so it just slices right through him. It's not much, there's no like aiming really required, and when you say throw, it's more of just like shank, because he's like right next to you. So I'll just call it what it is. You violently shank this half-orc just in cold blood. You did break the law and perforate private property, and now you just stabbed him in. But you know, that's none of my business. That's none of my business. Yeah, you quickly stab him in the jugular, and you jump through the opening in the window, and you can hear screams of fright, and people are just appalled at what you've just done. But you're outside, and you don't have to worry about it anymore.
I turn to Butternut, and I say, "Where are we going, bud?"
Butternut looks at you and doesn't reply like the horse that they are, because they actually can't talk. That was last time.
Well, she does have a great nose for direction, and also a great nose for questions.
You are worried in the back of your mind about this dragon priest that showed up in the last couple episodes. You feel like something may be going on, like perhaps there's something bigger with these questions, comments, and stories submitted by listeners. So you think it's probably in your best interest to figure out something more about this situation, so you know who we gotta go see.
A wise old man
with 2 glass eyes. You hop on Butternut's back, and you do one of those, like, things, and Butternut knows what that means. That means we're hightailing it back to the guy with 2 glass eyes. You turn and bolt off, looking for information, and you notice that there is a street rat, and by rat, I mean child, rummaging around in some of your baggage that's hooked up to Butternut. You didn't quite notice him. He's small. He's nimble. It looks like he's just rummaging his gross child fingers in your stuff.
I'm going to grab him by the scruff of the neck. I'm going to lift him up and say, "What are you looking for, kid?"
He says, "Hey, I just really love questions, comments, and stories submitted by listeners." It's like, come on, man, why are you doing this?
Well, I love them probably twice as much as you do, son.
He says, "Yeah, well, everyone in my village says that I'm the best at answering questions, comments, and stories submitted by listeners." He reaches inside this ratty loincloth that he's wearing, kind of rummages around for a while. Looks like there's a lot of stuff in there. Most importantly, looks like this kid has managed to get his hands on today's topic, how to be a flexible DM. He produces that out of his loincloth on a strip of very sweaty paper.
Well, I placed the boy on the back of Butternut, and I turned myself to where I am now facing him, and we're about to duel off to see who is a better question answerer.
Oh, snap. It's an answer duel. Just like in the stories. Yeah, he kind of holds it up haughtily.
Well, being a flexible DM, I think, is probably just as important as being a somewhat rigid DM. You know, you gotta have both. As far as the rigidness being, you know, as far as rules go, you know, you make a mistake, it happens. You roll poorly, it happens. You gotta stick to it. You can't always throw second chances at people. But being a flexible DM is, when people do something great, is rewarding them for it. I know a system we use is Divine Favor in ours. So say you do roll poorly, if there's something in the past you've done great at, or maybe just something that's just, as far as role-playing goes, just awesome, like you're really into your character, you just do something cool, you get rewarded with Divine Favor, which you can use to re-roll a terrible roll. So, I mean, that's kind of a little bit of both there, being rigid with the rules, but also being a little bit more lenient and rewarding your characters for doing cool stuff.
Yeah, that's sort of a role that I've adapted from, actually, D&D, the 5th edition, is they have something called Inspiration. As a matter of fact, it happened to be implemented, like I started implementing that before I read through the D&D 5.0 rulebook, because there's some other really notable DMs that are doing that before that actually got officially published. And I thought that was a great idea, and I guess Wizards of the Coast picked that up and thought that was a great idea too, because we would call it Divine Favor. D&D players would probably call it Inspiration. That's a big component of the mechanics of that game, but I think it also is, because I love the 5.0 D&D. It's great. If I wasn't so like immersed already in Pathfinder, we would probably transition over to D&D 5.0. But it lends itself to letting DMs be very flexible and letting them not have to worry so much about the nitty-gritty rules and the tactics of role-playing games, and really focus on the roleplay, focus on the players, focus on telling a really engaging story, and the numbers kind of, they don't take the back seat, but they take the passenger seat, definitely.
And that definitely makes a good impression on players when, especially if they're new, or maybe if they've been doing it a long time and they've had experiences before where it's all about the rules, it's all about doing it the right way and crunching the numbers. Whereas, sometimes you get a DM who's just like, look, man, we're here to have a good time. We're here to all be enthralled in this story. So maybe we'll let this slide for a second. But, being lenient and just letting like you were saying, let the story take the driver's seat and let the numbers and the rules take, the sidecar.
Yeah. That's, if people actually listen to this podcast, there'd probably be a very heated discussion between our listeners. But that's why I don't use a battle mat, and I know some people, that harkens back to classic D&D playing on grid, like a grid paper, like graph paper, which got translated over to battle maps. Squares, which got changed to hexagons, and then, there's a bunch of different battle maps now. But I found when you use a battle map, you are immediately saying non-verbally to your players, hey, the rules and the mechanics of this game are the most important thing right now. And then your role-playing game turns into a tactics game. It turns into a game of chess, essentially. And I have always felt like that just takes away from immersion. And combat, especially in a lot of fantasy role-playing engines, it takes forever. It's long. Combat is long. I've played games before where we'd be higher level and there'd be a lot of baddies, but combat literally takes the whole session because it's so... Each player has their spells or their abilities and stuff they want to do. They're strategizing with other players, and then there's the unavoidable sidebars people get on and things that aren't related to the game. And between all that, you've just sat down for 4 hours and you've played a game of chess. And that's, as interesting as chess is, it's not the game that I want to be playing at that moment. I don't play with battle maps because it lends itself to me not being able to be a flexible DM. I have to stay rigid. I have to follow the 5 foot by 5 foot grid mechanic instead of saying, well, this provokes an attack of opportunity, but, you did just do your 5 foot step, but you had high ground, so the angle of that high ground would, the rise over run, and what's the angle of declination? And there is actually a mechanic for people who love rules, and it's the advanced combat, where having height differences and, you have the high ground, you have the low ground, and what's the angle in this thing. People who really like rules would really love that. I really hate that. That bothers me immensely.
Yeah, and definitely with our campaign, not using a battle map has helped because we have newer players for one, but also it lets us to imagine it more. It lets us to, kind of put the framework for the situation, the scene, but I'm sure the three of our characters, I'm sure we all envision how it looks differently. And it allows us to start being a little creative. That kind of gets those juices flowing where later on maybe that session will be more creative because it's already got our brains thinking a little bit on picturing scenes and picturing how things are going. And also, my character can move 300 feet. You got to get a pretty big map for that.
Yeah, I mean, each square in most battle maps is 5 feet. So having a player that can run 300 feet is just not realistic. I'd need 2, sometimes 3 battle maps. And that's not practical. And it's not... I'm just going to say it's not useful. I don't think battle maps are useful. I think you can emulate exactly what a battle map would be doing without the cumbersome negatives that are associated with that, which some people, they exclusively do combat on battle maps. Like the DMs, my first DM that I played with, he was so good at battle maps, and if everyone could do it like him, then I would not have this opinion. But there is not another human on this planet that can make maps as good as he can. I like macro maps. He's really, really good at making very detailed, small battle map maps. And it's just insane, and it was so good. And because I can't emulate that in the same quality that he can, it's put a bad taste in my mouth. But part of being a flexible DM is also being flexible with what you want. I would want to not play with the battle map, but if all of my players were saying, like, hey, we're having a hard time understanding or visualizing combat, because combat can be really hectic. We only have 3 people in our campaign. If we had 5 people in our campaign, and then you're facing another, 6 bad guys, oh my gosh, that's so confusing. If my players were like, hey, we can't comprehend this, that's a lot of stuff going on, I would acquiesce, and I would say, we'll do battle maps and we'll make it work. And putting the players first is a huge, if not the biggest part of being a good DM and being a flexible DM.
And definitely going back to one of our previous episodes about what makes a great item, being flexible with players bringing you things that maybe not roll with the trajectory of the campaign. Maybe you've already started, the backstories are kind of set, but this character's like, I think this would be really cool for my guy and his backstory for him to be searching for this kind of thing. And being flexible and being able to alter, the campaign, maybe not now, but later on, let the story kind of mutate itself into allowing this new thing, this new desire for your character to have, allow that to be part of the campaign as well.
Yeah, you constantly have to be checking your priorities as a DM, and I've always found that you can never go wrong whenever your priority is the player. And we say this every single episode, and I think by now, basically anybody that is playing any role-playing games, because of how established they are, they would already know that. They would already know that the players come first. But there's so many DMs on all these different... There's forums, and there's YouTube channels, and there's all these outlets, and they're constantly butthurt because they didn't get what they want, and I'm just wanting to strangle them through my computer because I'm like, it's not your game. You made the story, but these are the characters. That would be like J.R.R. Tolkien writing the Lord of the Rings series, and every time Frodo got hurt, him being like, oh man, Frodo's so cool though, Frodo should be invincible. And so, Shelob, the big spider, stabs him, and he's gonna die. But then halfway through that story, he's like, well, Shelob's really a jerk, so she's dead and Frodo's fine, the ring's destroyed, and then everything's good because Frodo's a cool guy. It's like, it doesn't matter what you want. As a DM, it really doesn't matter what you want. As long as the story stays cohesive and people are having fun, if your story and your narrative gets completely derailed and you go in a direction that you never intended, at the end of the day, it's a game. And if people are having fun, that should be what's really driving you to DM anyway.
And at the end of the day, that's probably a pretty cool challenge for you to try and take on, is getting your players to get them back on track with where you want the story to kind of go. Because, like you said, you have probably an outline for how you want it to kind of go, for it to be a good story. But then players might take a 90-degree left or 90-degree right turn somewhere in there. And then you have the quote-unquote fun job of trying to get your players back on track for what you want to do.
And just a quick anecdote. Last week, whenever we played, an hour before we started playing, our dear friend and my fellow co-host of this podcast, you might know him as Foster Grant, decides, hey, it'd be a really cool idea to, invite my cousin to this session and say, hey, you need to incorporate his character into the fabric of this past couple months tapestry. And at first I was like, oh, that's not gonna happen. And I texted you like, that's not gonna happen, trying to be polite.
To which I replied, that's perfectly fine.
That's fine. Yeah, no, you weren't a jerk about it. But then after a while, I was already thinking about doing this episode, and I was like, I gotta be flexible. I was like, I gotta do it. I gotta it'd be really wrong of me to enjoy board games as much as I do and want to do something like this podcast, devote so much time to editing and recording this podcast and wanting to share role-playing with other people, and then to say, oh, you want your cousin to play? Nope. No. Because at that point, he's already a player, and you gotta put the players first. And while I was reluctant at first to do that, I actually really enjoyed having his character in our game, and his characters are gonna wind up being more involved in this campaign because he brought something different to the table, and that's what players do. Players bring a different perspective, and if the DM learns to feed off of that, your players will do all the work for you, and that's definitely what he did. I'm so glad that I wound up doing that. I'm so glad that you brought him there.
He's very good at articulating things, and I think you even enjoyed that, because us other three players aren't the best at articulation, but he is phenomenal at getting across what he wants to say with a drop of honey and just letting you soak it in. I think
he's kind of got like this... It always sounds like he's trying to sell you something, and he makes you want it too. It was really interesting for me to be like, we encountered some baddies, and it was kind of this big brooding barbarian type enemy character, and he wound up, I almost said coercing, but it wasn't coercion, it was more of just like, let's have a piggyback race. And it was so like, where did this come from? And it was so funny and interesting, and I really enjoyed it. And yeah, you're right. His silver tongue was such an interesting change to our story. Because you're right, you guys aren't the most articulate, but that's fine. And we're working with it, and we're having a great time playing with you guys. It was really interesting to have such a different dynamic brought to the table. It was great. Be flexible.
And so I turned to the young lad on the back of Butternut, and I give him the, what now, come at me, bro. I just answered that question.
He had dropped the piece of paper in the wind a long time ago. He's flabbergasted, and he just does not understand how someone can have such perspicacity, such knowledge of the role-playing arts, and he gazes at you as one might gaze upon a god. And you hadn't noticed, but Butternut had completely fallen asleep during this little session you were having with him, but she kept on running. She's in the middle of nowhere right now, and you realize you are in what some people call the Badlands. In that they are bad and it's on land.
Well, due to my great sense of direction, which I generally just trust Butternut for, I have no idea where I am.
Yep.
But I do see the big billboard that says "Welcome to the Badlands."
Yeah. Classic.
Classic staple of the Badlands. They always have signs, so you know where in the Badlands you are, but one does not easily find the Badlands.
And you also know that the Badlands is kind of a circuitous route to get to the old man with two glass eyes, which you were just talking about how you're going to tell me his name just a second ago. So, I guess this...
Wise, old, glass-eyed man, Enrique.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Enrique of the clan of the Wizened Eyes.
Oh, I like that flavor text. Yeah, Enrique the Wizened Eyes lives kind of on the borders of the Badlands, so this isn't completely off course, but it's definitely more circuitous, and it is definitely more dangerous. But, you know, it's all part of the journey.
It is. And so I turn to this young boy. I pull him, pick him up. I turn back, facing a normal way on the horse. I sit him on my lap and say, "I will teach you the ways of question answering, my child."
Okay. You know that Butternut has a very severe case of narcolepsy, and she's not going to wake up anytime soon. And that may be okay because the boy looks at you expectantly and says, "Well, I mean, how about you throw a question at me? Maybe I'll try and answer a question while we try and wake up this dumb old two-legged horse."
Now, the first rule to being a great question answerer is to not insult your mouth. As I scold the child for, being mean to our wonderful provider of
transportation.
Yes, our wonderful provider of transportation that Butternut is. And now we have a question from Lost Templar 84. He says, "Hello. I'm about to start playing a Pathfinder game, and I'll be playing my first lycanthrope. It's going to be a world built around a horror adventure setting. I have access to all of the books, and I've been doing some poking around the internet for build ideas. I'm going to start with a level 1 barbarian because of story reasons, but I was wondering if maybe I should class into a fighter as well and build from there. Since I'm going to be a werewolf, I was thinking about going all unarmed combat, even in human form. I'm all ears since I have never played Pathfinder before."
Ooh, that's actually a really good one. The first place to start with something like that is to go ahead and cross-reference other material so that other people have done the work for you and you can just kind of leech off of that and get inspiration from that. And the first place my mind goes through is Call of Cthulhu. If you're going to do a horror setting with like lycanthropes and magical supernatural beasts, that's a great place to start looking for inspiration. But as far as classes go, it depends on, I feel like, what type of archetype you're wanting to fulfill within your group. If that's something that even is really a concern of Lost Templar. So if you are wanting to obviously be more damagey, you can take the I would say the barbarian route, because they're more focused on brute strength and being right in the middle of battle and being a tank, being able to take a lot of damage, being able to deal out a lot of damage, but they also take penalties for all those things as well, which I feel like thematically fits a lycanthrope like really, really well, because a lot of times in lycanthropy, I know that Pathfinder has were-sharks and stuff like that. It's like people can turn into like sharks and stuff. There's always a drawback, and classically it's like they can't go out in sunlight, or like there's some type of material like silver or crosses and stuff that they abstain from even being around. So I feel like a barbarian would fit that, because every time they go into their rage, they also are fatigued afterwards. So thematically, I feel like barbarian fits, but I'm sure there's an argument for fighters as well.
Yeah, there's a great comment. There's a great comment here from Camino Hanshin that says, "If you can, you should ask your DM if you can go with the Moon-Cursed Barbarian archetype. This archetype allows you to trade out or alter certain abilities based on the given archetype for the purposes of giving more roleplay potential," which I think is also a great idea.
Yeah, anytime you can utilize even third-party resources, which I sometimes shy away from because they can be a little unbalanced, but anytime you can use third-party resources to enable you to fulfill like a roleplay characterization that you want, I'd say go for it, and your DM should be okay with that as well. Sometimes they have to tweak things. There's been times where I have already like retconned something that I have created and I thought was balanced. You know, having a very intimate knowledge of our campaign, I created an item and it's just way too powerful or way too easy to abuse. And a lot of times third-party resources can be like that. Some of the archetypes, like the Zen Archer, if maximized and stuff, can just run amok. They can be almost invincible. Imagine the Zen Archer is a wizard with a sniper rifle. So a lot of times with wizards, is their drawback is they're kind of mushy. Like they'll get hit and then they'll have to take the back seat for like the fighter or the rogue or something like that, or the ranger. With Zen Archer, it's just a monk ranger that can just shoot magic out of their bow, and it's just absolutely insane. So regardless if you decide to do that archetype, still talk to your DM about it. That should be one of the first things that you do, is figuring out the parameters of what you can and can't do with a lycanthrope.
Yeah, and definitely being a lycanthrope is also like you said, you're going to a horror aspect. So if you're going to be, especially on the more role-playing side of it, if you're just there to enjoy the experience, there's a lot of stuff you can do with that when it comes to role-playing your character and giving him certain afflictions like Andrew was talking about, whether it be, like you said, silver or just a random material that you find is funny for him to be afflicted by, and stuff like that. So when it comes to building your character, like you said, talk to your DM, but really don't know what you want to do, and then let your DM help you flesh it out.
Yeah, if you ever have any points where you feel like you're stumbling over your character, talk to your DM and talk to the other players and see what they think is interesting. Don't do exactly what they say all the time, because again, there's your character and it shouldn't be determined by everyone else. But whenever I'm making a playable character, like I'm going to be playing, not an NPC, I always start with what is their flaw, like what is their weakness. And I remember playing my last character, the very last character that I played, which I very seldomly actually get to play a character. I played like a paladin sort of archetype named Timshell, and his big weakness was he wasn't a pacifist, but he definitely wanted to shy away from violence, especially when concerning animals. And we were on a pirate's boat, and I was in charge of clearing out the rats from the boat, and they wanted me to kill them, but I went out of my way to build like a makeshift schooner for all of these rats. And, I was totally ready for the DM to just have one of his NPCs figure out that I'm not doing my job on this boat, for them to throw me overboard, and then Timshell's gonna be gone. But that was such a fun thing to do, to have like this character who's all about doing good and doing right and following the law, but he just can't hurt, and he just can't do it. Like, he'll slay evil. He'll be the first person to like slice open the throat of like a star spawn Cthulhu child, but he's not gonna hurt an animal. They didn't do anything wrong. So if you're gonna do a lycanthrope, I would say start with the weaknesses, and then from the roleplay aspects that you want, then you can pick your class. Start with what you want your character to be like, and then the classes are really just numbers. And then you can pick those numbers however you see fit. Whether that's a fighter or a barbarian, or you decide to do something a little off the cuff and go to like an archetype that doesn't fall into one of the vanilla classes.
So, there you go, the Lost Templar 84.
Yeah, I hope that helps. Yeah, you pass that to the boy, and he gives that quick reply. He gives all of these useful tips and tricks if you ever wanted to be a lycanthrope. And you're impressed with this boy's question, comment, and story submitted by listener answering prowess. There may be a little bit more to this boy than meets the eye, and that's probably a good thing, because in the midst of this very emblazoned conversation, you have been surrounded. Butternut's asleep. You were unaware. This boy was unaware. You are surrounded right now.
Well, not wanting to show the vast amounts of fear that have just risen through my body to this boy, I look stalwart upon my enemies. I look through the crowd to look to see who's in charge.
Well, it's not exactly people so much as our first monster spotlight. Because you're surrounded by 20 cockatrices. Now, Foster, are you familiar with a cockatrice?
A cockatrice or a cockatrice?
Either one. Are you familiar with either one of those?
Well, as far as being familiar...
Do you know what a cockatrice is?
A cockatrice is a desert chicken, is it not?
That was close.
Close?
That wasn't, yeah. I thought I was going to stump you on that one. It is chicken-like. I'm reading from the Pathfinder Bestiary. A cockatrice is a hideous avian creature that has the body of an emaciated rooster, the wings of a bat, and a long, scaly tail. You're surrounded by hideous avian creatures.
Well, let's hope we don't catch the bird flu.
Yeah, that'd be really bad. And I chose them for my monster spotlight. Our very first monster spotlight. I was debating between doing an ooze, because I really like oozes and their subtype. But cockatrice is a really cool idea for our very first monster spotlight, because it's taking familiar elements and kind of turning them on their heads. And even though this is what some people consider like a chimera, you know, you put like the head of a person onto the body of a lion or something like that. And the cockatrice definitely is. It's just a chicken with vats of a wing and then a scaly tail that can turn you into stone. I like the idea of turning something that's very harmless, like a rooster, and turning it into something very threatening. It's a magical beast that can turn you into stone that is incurable unless you have some type of like magic ability that can dispel that. And this goes back into being a flexible DM, but being also flexible with monsters, not just a story. I never am a DM that wants to throw out a dragon. Just like a dragon. You gotta go kill a dragon, even though this podcast is about that thing. But I'm never going to have my players go on a quest to slay the dragon without there being some other hook. And I like the idea of you're surrounded by just like, you could just say like, oh, you're surrounded by a bunch of, I don't know, orcs. Now, orcs are going to attack you. But then whenever you start just getting weird with it, I think is the easiest way to say it, is just getting weird and saying like, you know, oh, it's chickens, but it's got bat wings, it's got a spiny tail, and you're surrounded, and it's going to turn you into stone if you're not careful. Like, I love that flexibility in imagination, and it's really vivid. Like, it's very strange, and it's very alien, but you can picture it so easily, like this ravenous chicken that wants to turn you into stone. Anyways, that was my monster spotlight. I just wanted to bring that up.
Shout out to the 20 cockatrices that are surrounding me and my party.
Oh yeah, speaking of that, they're gonna kill you.
Well, I say the magic word that usually wakes up Butternut from her narcoleptic naps.
And what is that? What is that?
And that is Petunia Bubbles.
As soon as Butternut hears these words, she awakens from her slumber, and hearing this code word, she begins twisting and spinning and just kind of horse karate kicking all of these cockatrices. And cockatrices, as we all know, have the ability to bite you and turn you into stone, but they have a very severe weakness to horse kicks. That might as well be in the rule book. That's like page 1 of any rule book anywhere. Look it up. Try and prove me wrong. Get your Yahtzee board game out, blow off the dust, open up that rule book. It's in there. Promise. Before you know it, in a cloud of dust and debris, there's 20 dead cockatrices, each with a matching impression of a horseshoe in their face.
And I look to the boy, awed by the fact that Butternut is so agile on 2 feet, on 2 hooves, I should say. And I say, one does never underestimate the power of a bipedal horse.
Yeah, Butternut kind of looks back up at you guys and gives a really swift, but definitely cool flick of her aviator sunglasses and just kind of flicks them up a little bit and then proceeds on her way. She knows where Enrique is. This is piddly stuff to her. So she heads off into the Badlands, and you feel like Enrique maybe is not gonna give you the warmest reception because of what happened the last time you were there, after he told you to find the dragon inside the very first cave that you went to, past, you know, the scorched wayscape.
We let the dragon slip through our fingers.
Yeah. Do you wanna regale us with how you have so maybe carelessly incited the dissatisfaction of Enrique?
Well, it all started a long time ago.
Yep.
When I was but a boy. And Enrique was a man with 2 normal eyes. And he had told me of a great warrior, a great champion who would one day answer the many questions that role players have.
Mm-hmm.
And it inspired me to train.
Oh, so you mean the legend?
Yes.
With a capital T and a capital L.
And a capital D.
Oh.
The legend.
That one.
Yes, it is a very famous legend amongst our people, and he just enthralled me with the tales, and so I worked night and day studying the various role-playing guides, playing role-playing games to further understand that view of a player. But when the time came for me to conquer this dragon, to step up and be the champion of the listeners, the dragon slipped through my fingers because I was clumsy.
Yeah, you were. And for all you know, the dragon, by now, could have stolen countless comments, questions, and stories submitted by listeners. And that's the one thing that Enrique didn't want to have happen. You really kind of dropped the ball on this one. So seeing him again, it's gonna be sort of a weird reunion, especially since he's your stepson. And you're much younger than he is, but, you know...
I married his mother.
I'm trying to think about the logistics of that. How old were you? Let's not talk about that. Okay, you're heading to the Badlands. You get through that easy peasy. And you see Enrique's hut. And I will, as a gracious, flexible DM, I will give you a chance that if you want to turn around, you can turn around. The boy senses your nervousness. He says, hey man, it's not too late to just turn around.
As helpful and as nerve-calming as that would be, a true champion faces what makes them nervous. And so I go to my stepson.
The little boy says, social interaction makes me really nervous. I barely leave my basement.
Well, you're gonna learn today.
All right. Yeah, you walk up to Enrique's house. Your house. It's just your house. He's your stepson. You walk up to the door, and you know Enrique as sort of a conjurer, and he's not quite a trickster, but he's on the verge of being kind of troublesome because he likes to put enchanted wards on doorways, and you know that before you go into this house, you're gonna have to get through that ward, which just so happens is a question, comment, or story submitted by a listener. You're gonna have to answer that correctly for this door to open. That question is reading up on hags. It says they give birth after eating a human child. Would it make any sense for a hag to devour a non-human to give birth to a sort of half-hag? That's by Arth 93.
Well, Arth 93, I think that if it's devouring, as you say, perhaps a non-humanoid child, then yes, I would say perhaps it does give birth to a, mixed of a hag and a orc, or a hag and a lion person. Whatever child they devour, I'm assuming that's what their goal is to be, a haggish, whatever they devoured, a haggish lionkin, a haggish fox person.
That's great and all. You hear a lock open up. You realize that this ward is multi-layered. There may be several very quick questions for you to answer. This next one is submitted by Jim Boof, the Sierra. I'm making a southern gunslinger for an upcoming campaign and I want to nail his voice. What are some good examples of a southern accent? Quick.
Well, I do say that you just need to add a little whistle to your S's, and you gotta make sure you sound pretty old, and I'd say you're darn southern.
You hear another click. You're getting closer and closer. Something's probably gonna blow up because that's his MO. You taught him from when you were a child,
from whenever he was middle-aged. To never play with explosive. He always plays with explosives. You're going to have to answer one more question from Jaredit. He asks, I'd like to become a DM for 5th edition D&D, but I have no experience in doing so. What is the best place to start when learning to be a DM?
I think you just need to pick up your phone, pick up your gadget, listen to a podcast, listen to someone playing a role-playing game. See how they flesh it out, how their story flows and ebbs. Kind of just draw from people who are currently doing that and try and nitpick what they do to form your own kind of brew of how you want to run a game.
So are you saying that maybe they should just listen to this podcast?
Maybe I am. And I turn to the boy and I say, that is a darn good answer.
In your best country accent, you hear the last click of the magical ward open up, and a beautiful banner just flows down that says, shameless plug for the Dragon's Horde podcast. And the door creaks open, and you see on the other side of the door, there is a very old, very shriveled up, glass-eyed man, and he looks like he's injured.
I walk up to who I assume is my stepson, Enrique.
It is.
I caress his face with my hand, and I say, my child, what has happened to you?
Dad!
Quit smoking, son!
Hey, it's too late. I have to warn you. There's a dragon priest. He's trying to find his master so they can steal every last question, comment, and story submitted by listeners of the Dragon's Horde podcast.
Stay with me, Enrique.
All right. I guess I won't be dying anymore. He says he dropped this on his way out, and I think it may be the key to the journey ahead. And he reaches inside his tunic, and he pulls out. It's just a small, simple-looking pen. Just a pen. Just a ballpoint pen. And he says, this pen has written countless comments, questions, and stories submitted by listeners of the Dragon's Horde podcast. With this artifact, you could make thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of his own. And you just can't let that happen. Don't let this fall into the wrong hands. And he falls over and the pen skids out of his hand.
I turn my now deceased stepson.
Oh no, he said, I just found a penny on the floor. He holds it up. You can take this as well. He's fine.
Oh, well, thank you, Enrique.
He's bleeding profusely now, but he's fine.
I turn him over on his back. I call for Butternut to enter the house. And I say, Butternut, pass me the needle, pass me the thread, and get some sutures ready.
The boy says, oh man, that's a pretty fancy looking pin. He reaches down and he grabs the pen.
No!
You can see a wave of magical energy pulse into this small boy. And he says, I can see all the questions, comments, and stories submitted by listeners throughout all time.
And you can see that his form is changing into this hulking mass of questions, comments, and answers submitted by listeners. It looks like he's not too cool with you wanting to solve all these questions, comments, and stories submitted by listeners. And Enrique says, "No! Literally the only thing I told you to do, and you've already done goofed it up."
Oh, man. I call out to the boy, who is unnamed. "Oh, basement child, you must let go of the pen. You are not ready for all of these questions, comments, and stories submitted by listeners."
He says, "Basement child..." Why am I talking in Enrique's voice? He says, "Basement child isn't here anymore. It's only questions, comments, and stories now." And you see magical pulses of energy just emanate from him, and you see the wood beneath his feet of this shack just splintering under the weight of his knowledge.
I go to rip the pen from his hands.
You're gonna need to roll strength for that, man. He's a strong little boy.
I didn't get my dice.
Oh.
15.
That's exactly this boy's strength. And it's just a deadlock right now. You've got the top of the pin, he's got the bottom of the pin, and he's just looking at you.
Well, I know like little boys like to play this game, so I just put my hand right above his.
You have bested him in a trial of wits. You put your hand above his hand, and he reflexively puts his hand above your hand, thus letting go of the pin. You now have the pin in both hands, and you tear it away, and you feel the same corruption, the same weight of all of these questions, comments, and stories submitted by listeners, and you fall to your knees as a question comes into view.
Well, this question is from NF Inc. As a DM, let's say you have a mansion on a hill that is full of baddies that you're saving for later. These baddies are handling a plot point right now, but for any of this to make any sense, the baddies are way more powerful than the party can handle. If I tell the sheriff to tell the party to stay out of the mansion, they're going to go to the mansion before he can finish the sentence. If I avoid discussing the mansion, other than to point out that there is one on a hill near a town, it will feel as Deus Machina when it is time to go there. Is there a happy medium where I can acknowledge that a big baddie lives in the house, but make him scary enough for them not to want to approach him?
Yes, you can. And I actually just recently had this issue that I was going over. And what I always say is I just let my players do what they want. So if I know you shouldn't go up to this house, I'm not going to say that in DM voice. I will say that in like an NPC, like, you shouldn't go up into that house because it's really dangerous. But players are going to want to do what they want to do anyway, and then they're probably going to do that thing that they want to do. So if they want to run into a mansion full of baddies that they can't beat, I say more power to them and just go ahead and let them do it. Because more often than not, they'll get there, and I do what I would call putting them in their place. And I would just beat the snot out of them and just have that enemy beat them to the brink of death, and then have a moment of like you're not worth it kind of instance. So, and it doesn't have to play out exactly like that. They could do non-lethal damage. There could be other circumstances. But if the players want to go and they want to tackle something that is way out of their like range of being able to deal with, then just that's not on you, that's on them. So if they want to try and do that, that's fine, because players should always know that retreating is an option. Always an option, just like fighting is, just like using magic is, just like using your skills and charisma is. Retreat is an option.
Definitely. And there was a scenario in a previous session that we've had recently where we were going to fight this gargantuous beast And me and my character were like, there is no possible way for us to defeat this. This beast is the size of a city block. Like, it is ginormous. Like, ginormous isn't even the right word for it. It's gargantuous.
Gargantuan. Yeah.
And the other two people in my party were like, no, we can fight it. And I was just like, no, we can't. So me and my guy bolted because I was like, I don't have some, special way to enhance my hit points, stuff like that. Like, they're, along the lines of our campaign, they're the daughters of a deity. So like, they have a little bit of extra stuff where me and my character, we're just a guy and a ninja. So we were just...
Well, a guy with a ninja with a sword that can cast people into a plane where their existence is erased from, all time and space. But you're just a guy. Yeah.
But I had already used that ability for the day. So I was out.
So you were actually just a guy.
Yeah, I was just Scott Sterling. That was me. So I had to get out of there. So stuff like that, I understand where players, we want to, like, oh my gosh, I'm this person. I'm super awesome. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go kick the snot out of any and everything. But, like Andrew was saying, sometimes you just got to show them really how far down on the peg scale they are and just kind of beat the snot out of them.
Yeah, and I find it really funny that they ask this. It seems like there's already been like a story developed a little bit, but I open almost every single one of my campaigns with a moment like this. And we mentioned this in episode 1, that players, when they first start off, they're novice adventurers, they're really bad, but a lot of times players get delusioned with all the things that they become in the future, like things that they can do, like, oh, I can cast like 6 level spells, and that's crazy, and I can do all this stuff. But they're not that right now, and you need to remind them that they're not that right now. So I start every single one of my campaigns with kind of a kick in the teeth, and then, go from there. The instance in this campaign was it was a subtype of a catfolk. We call them lionkin. They're lion catfolk, and they're brutal, and they literally turned an NPC inside out in front of them, ripped open their torso and flipped them inside out, as they're like, hey, you're, like you said, you're really low on the totem pole right now. So this is a chance for just great storytelling and great roleplay. Don't pass up this opportunity to teach your players kind of the harsh realities of this world that you've crafted. Don't look at it as like, oh, there's a hurdle I have to get over and a problem. This is a huge opportunity for you. Maybe a little sadistic opportunity, but it's I would not shy away from this chance.
Well, there you go, NF Inc.
The question fades away. It was a test of your abilities, and you have just passed the test. You are the wielder of the pen now, and you can see the boy kind of reeling backwards, and he looks fatigued and exhausted. Behind him, you see the smoky outline of the dragon priest.
I turn to Butternut and say, where are those sutures? Then I grab the needle and thread, and I start knitting a shirt.
Thanks again for listening to the Dragon's Horde podcast. If you want to submit any content or questions of your own, you can message us at thedragonshordecast@gmail.com or visit our Reddit page, The Dragon's Hordecast. Or tweet at us at The Hordecast for a chance to star in a future adventure. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and catch our podcast weekly on Tuesdays. And make sure to rate us on iTunes so we can keep the adventure going.